So welcome to the Coffee Connect. This month we're talking about universal design for learning and social emotional behavioral learning and where that connection is. As a reminder, we have our NeMTSS media library. So we do record this and it will be posted. If you have comments or questions throughout, we can edit those out before we post them. So we would love any interaction that you have. We're the NeMTSS Social Emotional Behavior Learning Specialist team. I'm Mackenzie Rydell. I serve Region 1, and then I will let the others introduce themselves.
I'm Jill Gunther. Right now, currently, I serve Region 2 and 3. So that's ESUs 2, 3, and OPS, and then 1, 7, and 8.
I am Sarah Gentry. I'm SEBL Specialist for Region 5, which is ESUs 13, 15, and 16.
And I'm Chandra Essex. I am SEBL Specialist for Region 4, and those are ESUs 9, 10, 11, and 17.
And as you can see, we're hiring for Region 3, so share that with your friends. So as you know, if you've been here this semester, we're really honing in on some different topics and trying to partner with others that are in really in deep in that work. And so this month we shared with some of our NeMTSS regional leads. Heidi Farmer, she's not here today, but she is the Region 1 support lead and does a lot of work around universal design. And then we have Brooke Gabers here. Brooke, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Brooke Gabers. I'm the Region 3 support lead for Nebraska NeMTSS, so serving ESUs 1, 7, and 8.
Awesome. And all of our regional leads do some stuff with universal design, but these two gals are just really passionate. So we are excited that they helped out, and we're excited Brooke's here with us today. So for our welcoming inclusion activity, we're going to do a little dipping sauce debate. So if you want to put in the chat which dipping sauce you're going to use for your McNuggets. Honey mustard, ketchup, ranch, sweet and sour. There's not honey on here. I was kind of sad to see there's no honey listed. Barbecue, honey mustard. Oh, wow. We got some of everything here. Awesome. Well, I know for me, I like ranch, but it depends on what kind of ranch. So this activity, we stole it straight from the first 5. If you haven't used the first 5 before, it's a great resource where they email you some different activities you can use to welcome your students, whether it be a quick fun thing like this. It could be a feelings, emotions check-in. There's some different questions on there if you're using circles. So that would be a great resource for you if you haven't. We have our Coffee Connect Padlet. This is where we upload any new resources and activities. All of the links in our Coffee Connect are linked in the Padlet, as well as a couple others that we don't talk about. So I encourage you to look through there. The password is capital NeMTSS, all caps. And then each Coffee Connect then gets its own Padlet after we get everything done and all of the recording in the slide. And for this one with universal design, we really used the CAST website and those UDL, their framework and their guidelines to really drive this presentation today. So when we think of universal design, it's really when we're creating an environment or designing an environment to meet the needs of all students and each unique learner. And it's not necessarily more work, but it is different work. So it can feel like more in the beginning, but that's just getting into the routine. And as you all know, when we learn and grow, typically it's a little harder when we first start. But when we do this, it really does benefit everybody in the end. And we took this quote from the Path Forward video through SPED Strategies. We aren't playing that video today, but it's also a great resource. So social emotional behavioral learning, we always like to define this for everybody when we start with Coffee Connect. So we at NeMTSS define it as the systematic process of fostering those social and emotional skills for students and adults to create that safe, supportive environment that creates those positive behavioral and mental health outcomes for all. So these skills are teachable throughout life, through our littles to our older learners and even into our adults. We can really drive the social emotional skill development within our PBIS or behavior systems framework. We can hit on that mental health and wellness piece, especially at that tier 1 level. And it really does relate to our college and career readiness skills. We have our 5 SEBL skills. So we have self-awareness, self-management, problem-solving, relationships, and pro-social behavior. These skills, we are typically teaching some of them maybe indirectly in the classroom already. So really honing in on what are these skills and how can we lace them in and integrate them into what we're doing. All right, so universal design, it actually wasn't something that was created in education. It originally came from architecture and thinking about creating accessible environments for people with disabilities. But it's really something that educators have taken on. And so in the context of education, UDL has 3 core beliefs. The first one is variability is the rule and not the exception. So everybody is different. Everybody has different preferences. And so when we're thinking about creating that classroom, we're considering everybody's variability. The second one is all students can work towards those same firm, high expectation goals when given the correct support and flexible means. And the third is that all students can use learner agency to help them in their learning environment. And when barriers are removed, they're able to learn and meet those high expectations. When I think about universal design in the world, maybe outside of education, there's a lot of different things out there that we probably access, even though it's not necessarily something that is required for us to function. So for example, electric toothbrushes. I use an electric toothbrush. I know a lot of people do use electric toothbrushes, but they were originally created for people who had some motor problems where they weren't able to get all of their all of the angles and stuff that they needed with a normal manual toothbrush. And so that is just an example of something that a lot of people access and can benefit from, even though they don't need, it's not required for them to do the activity. Another example would be a key fob to start your car. So we have all these fancy cars where you just walk up and you open the door and you can push a button to start your car. And it is a universal design. And something that would have been really helpful for my grandma, who had really bad arthritis in her hands, where she was literally pinching her palms together to try to start her car when she was driving. And so that is another design that a lot of people benefit from, but don't necessarily need. So within our universal design in the education environment, we have these 3 main guidelines to the framework. These guidelines, they really offer a set of concrete suggestions to be applied to any discipline or domain that ensures all learners access and participate in meaningful, challenging learning opportunities. So they can be used across different subjects and different context areas. The CAS team recently updated these this summer, July 2024. And so from the previous model to this model, there's some main changes that I'm just going to call out quickly. So the first one is really around executive functioning. It is now addressed out and integrated throughout all of the guidelines. The second one is the goal isn't focused on expert learning, but more learning agency. Because when we think about expert learners, it implies that there's an endpoint, but really learning is a journey. And by using learner agency, it really applies that collaborative and collective work that we're co-creating in our learning environments. The third one is the removal of the word provide, because universal design isn't something that adults do, but it's something that we're doing with our students. We're co-creating and designing environments with our students. And the fourth is that focus on student voice and how important it is for adults to listen and work with our students to reflect on the potential barriers that we might have in our classrooms. And so we really need to create pathways for multiple journeys, or pathways and multiple journeys for students to reach those same high expectations. So here's where we're going to start that really tight UDL SEBL connection. You'll see here we have our competencies or our SEBL skills on the left. And then within each guideline, I didn't really talk about those. Engagement, representation, and action and expression. We'll break those down as we go. There's different checkpoints. So we'll touch on those, but this one is just a brief explicit call out of some of those checkpoints, and then really that big connection. So when we think of self-awareness, we really, if we're giving students agency in their learning, they need to know themselves, their interests, their preferences, their strengths, their weaknesses, maybe their learning choice to help them create that environment that best suits them. We need self-management because if students can't self-regulate, they aren't able to self-manage, and then learning makes it really hard to occur in the classroom. When we have that problem-solving skill, we need to support students and their executive functioning to help ensure that they're able to make choices and problem solve issues in the classroom that really benefit their learning. Relationships, that co-creation, that collaboration, not only with adults, but with other students, really drives the work being done. And then pro-social behavior, to collaborate with others, we really need to be aware of others' feelings, beliefs, and backgrounds. Within the context of NeMTSS, we have our 4 main essential elements. We need all of these to create a strong, sustainable system, but we're really going to hone in on that layered continuum of support today and talk about what universal design looks like at that Tier 1 core support level. So Tier 1 core support is inclusive of all students and all learners. And we really need to focus on what are the adults doing to create that positive, safe, and inclusive environment that really fosters those social, emotional, behavioral, and academic teaching and learning skills. So when we think of that universal design, differentiated instruction, and scaffolding, we're creating that to create those strong, effective supports for all students. We're having those high quality standards aligned instructional materials that systematize and prioritize the support to develop all students' learning. And then we're making sure that all students have access to those high quality instructional materials and instruction, no matter their needs. We have a video here that I believe we're going to play. So Jill will get that started.
People ask me all the time, what is UDL? UDL is Universal Design for Learning, and it is not a new name for differentiated instruction. There is a framework, Universal Design for Learning, and there is a framework, Differentiated Instruction. And although they can be used to complement each other, they are absolutely not the same thing. So let's talk about a little analogy that I like to use to explain the difference. Imagine for a moment that I was going to have a smashing dinner party. Now, if it was universally designed, I want to make sure that everybody is going to have an awesome meal at my party. And so I'm going to anticipate or predict the variability of possible guests. Now, as my best friends, you're all invited, and you're going to bring partners and friends, and I might not know exactly what they eat, but worry not. I can predict the variability. I'm going to predict that some people might be lactose intolerant, might be vegan or vegetarian, have cultural needs, or they might be picky eaters. And when I can predict this, I realize that it would be a really bad idea to serve a casserole, right? Because imagine you come into my party, you're thinking you're going to have an awesome time, boom, tuna noodle. Oh, I'm going to exclude a lot of people. But here's the thing. When I think universally, I recognize the importance of having different options and choices for everyone. And so when I universally design a party, I am going to serve a buffet. And the same thing happens in my classroom, is we can recognize and embrace the incredible variability of our students and identify the barriers that we know that some students face. And so if I recognize that I might have some students who struggle with language, some students who are decoding below grade level, some students who need additional challenges, I can create a buffet of ways for students to learn and share what they know using firm goals and flexible means. Now, differentiated instruction uses flexible groupings to make decisions about what specific students need. It's a great way to provide tier 2 support or additional intervention for your students, but when you plan using differentiated instruction, it can feel a little bit like you are a short order cook. If you're coming to my party and I say, I'm gonna have to make something for the people who are lactose intolerant, and I have to have another dish for everyone who is vegan, and I wanna make sure I have something gluten-free, I am now a short order cook and my kitchen is on fire. And here's the thing, you don't get to make choices for yourself. So we want to universally design instruction, we want to be really proactive and planful about identifying barriers and making sure that we're not reacting and providing additional dishes for every student. So the next time you feel a little frazzled and on fire with planning because you're worried about every single group of students, take a step back, identify some barriers, and make a flexible buffet and allow learners to self-differentiate and self-direct their learning. Because at a buffet, when everyone makes their own plate and you provide feedback and support those choices, I'm telling you, it is a much better party.
Yes, we love that video. It's definitely not the first time that we have played it. But one of the big take-home messages is that you aren't a short order cook when you're creating that universal design. You're really taking that preventative approach where you're planning, being very planful of what you're doing. So you're providing an environment where students can really take on that learner agency. So universal design has taught us that learning, it's really the environment that needs to change, not the students. And when we talk about that environment, we're not just talking about the physical environment. We're really talking about that, both the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual. So the physical environment is really setting the stage to create that nurturing, emotional, and intellectual environment in your classroom. And the emotional environment is creating that really safe learning space where students feel that the adults care about them and believe in them, and they feel safe to learn and take risks. And it really is that culture and the climate of the classroom. And the intellectual environment is that environment where you're believing all students have the ability to learn and can reach those high expectations, and really having that can-do attitude for you as the adults, but also fostering that within your students.
Perfect. So Mackenzie mentioned earlier that what we do around universal design, this happens within Tier 1 core. So when we think about the learning environment within Tier 1 core, what are some of those things that we're looking for that would tell us that we're doing a good job? What are those things that are going to make Tier 1 core help all students succeed? For one, we want to have that acceleration mindset for all learners, recognizing how important those high expectations are for everybody and believing that all students can achieve those grade level benchmarks. Having a warm classroom environment, I think this is really important that we've established a climate and culture within our rooms where students feel comfortable to take those risks. Making sure that we're emotionally responsive educators and that we're elevating student voice when appropriate. We're supporting students in setting their own goals and monitoring their learning and their progress towards achieving those goals. And then this piece that we're honing in on today, that universal design approach. So we like to use this example of like a bike ride when we talk about the difference between equality and equity. Again, Tier 1 core is for all students, but just inviting students into Tier 1 core, having that proximity to their peers isn't enough. We have to actually focus on how to make Tier 1 core accessible. And we know that there's a difference between equal and equity. So the example with the bike ride, I'm sure you've all seen, similar visuals. I think the baseball field is another one that's used a lot of times, but it would be a great notion if after work today, I decided I wanted to invite all of my friends to go on a bike ride. But if I told them that I was providing the bike, at some point that sounds nice that they don't have to bring their own. But if we all go out to ride that bike and I have the exact same size of bike for everybody, I'm going to have friends who aren't able to go on that bike ride. So it's just a good reminder that what we're doing at Tier 1 core isn't always going to be accessible for everyone. And so it's just kind of a think about as we start to lesson plan. So diving in, what does UDL look like? We have kind of this anticipatory set or opportunity for a silent reflection here. And I'm going to go through a couple different questions and just kind of think in your head how you would respond to these. The first question that I have is just think about something that you understand really well on a personal level, or something you're really good at. If I was to answer this question, the first thing that comes to mind for me is I would say, I think cooking something that I believe I'm pretty good at. The next question then is, how did you develop that understanding? How did you develop that skill or that thing that you're really good at? Me personally, I loved to watch cooking shows when I was little. I was just thinking about this this morning. I even have a nephew who's named after Alton Brown. So obviously it must have been a family thing that we loved watching cooking shows. But I love to watch those. I love to read. I would read a lot of recipe books that were in the kitchen. But then part of the reason that I developed this understanding or skill of cooking, I think was a little bit out of necessity. I grew up in a small town and my mom was one of the only doctors in the small town. So she was at work a lot. And then my dad, on top of his regular 9-to-5 job, he had a business of his own on the side and then was a football coach. So we were on the go a lot. And at an early age, I started to help cook dinner, help make the menus and plan the grocery list. So I think a little bit out of necessity, but some of it was that I enjoyed reading recipe books and I enjoyed looking up new recipes online or watching cooking shows. The last question for you to reflect on then is, how do you know that you understand that thing really well? How can you tell us that that's something you've mastered? And for me personally, I would say when my friends or family are having get-togethers, I have certain recipes that people always request or they ask for. Otherwise, I'm the one planning the entire meal, but people want to eat the food that I cook. Other things, sometimes I don't use recipes anymore. A lot of times I make up new recipes and, you measure with your heart and those types of things. So those would be the ways that I would be able to tell you that I think I know that skill really well. But as you reflect through those, what becomes really interesting about the answers is that we start to find similar trends between them. For example, on question number 2, there might have been a need, kind of like mine, a necessity. Maybe there was a want that you wanted to learn that new thing, or you read about it, you watched somebody else do it. For me, maybe it was watching my grandma cook in the kitchen, those types of things. You ask questions. When we start to get to question number 3, how can you show us that you know that thing really well? We have people who say I know that I can do that thing. I could explain it to somebody else. I could teach somebody else that new skill. I could break it down. I could do it in different ways, right? I could write about it. There's lots of different responses that we start to see. And what we notice is that deep understanding of whatever this thing is happens because of expert learning and personalized opportunities for you to learn. If we know those things, that's the way we develop those skills, we want to translate that into the way that we're lesson planning within our classroom, which leads us to thinking about universal design for learning.
All right, so we're going to dive deeper into each of those guidelines. So the first one is engagement. So when we think of engagement, we really think of those affective networks or the why of learning. And we're thinking about how learners are going to engage with the lesson. So affect is a really crucial learning or an element in the learning process, because learners really are a lot different in what sparks their motivation and their enthusiasm for learning. So when learners bring their authentic self to their learning environment, they're able to make those connections better to the new things that they're learning. And the UDL framework really emphasizes that learner variability and that learners have multiple and intersecting identities and many layers to them. So when we're really looking at engagement, we're really focusing on that learner variability. So we're thinking about how can we pique interest and welcome all people into our classroom? How can we sustain effort and persistence for our learners? And how are we creating that emotional capacity in our learning environment? And just to point out that these preferences might vary from week to week or day to day, and there's not one means of engagement that was really optimal for all learners in all contexts. So multiple options for engagement are essential in our classroom. So that first checkpoint is welcoming interest and identities. Throughout these slides, we'll have a little information on the checkpoint, and then we have 3 resources for each one. So this first one here, welcoming interest and identities, we're focusing on optimizing choice and autonomy in our classrooms. We're optimizing relevance, value, and authenticity. We want people to bring their real, true selves to learn. We're nurturing joy in play. We really want learning to be fun and something that our students enjoy doing and enjoy coming to school to do so. And addressing our bias, threat, and distractions. So that first box or bubble here is embedding those 3 inclusive practices. As you know, we have our welcoming inclusion, our engaging practices, and our optimistic closure. And this is a great way to really engage those interests and identities of your students in your classroom. That second bubble there is engaging in community building circles. If you're on our restorative practice journey in the state, you're learning about the use of circles. And they're a great way to really build those relationships and create that environment that really embraces that emotional capacity of our students. So that yellow bubble has a facilitator reflection example. It comes from Allie Hearn for being a circle facilitator. If you're using them, it'd be great for you to use. And that blue bubble is developing classroom expectations and values. It's an article from Edutopia, and it discusses ways that you can use collaboration in your learning environment to really create and uphold those common agreed upon values. So this really uses those students to co-create that learning environment. As you know, UDL does have some emphasis on creating choice and providing choice for your students. So this is just a little chart that shows you how you can provide choice within different things. So you can do it within activities, between activities, what to do or not do, who you're doing it with, where you're doing it, when, what, and when you stop. So that is a great resource just to think about choice a little bit further. But just a reminder that inclusion and creating that inclusive environment requires options and choices, but choice is not the same as universal design for learning. So choice is incorporated in that universal design, but there's a lot more to creating that environment beyond just giving choices. That second area is sustaining effort and persistence. So in this checkpoint, we're thinking about clarifying the meaning and purpose of goals, optimizing challenge and support, fostering collaboration, interdependence in a collective learning environment, fostering belonging and community, and offering action-oriented feedback. That first bubble is integrating activities Interactive activities is just a list of a lot of different activities within different settings. So group, pairs, large group, small group, of different activities you could do. That second one, holding high expectations for all, is an article of just 10 reminders of how we can hold students to high expectations. When we do this, we really help find a balance between challenge and support in fostering that can-do intellectual environment. And it really taps into that self-awareness and self-management skill. And that blue is using effective statements. This is a nice handout that gives an example of what effective statements look like in different scenarios. And it's really linked into their school-wide behavioral expectations.
So we know that student goals are directly tied to teacher expectations, and there's a lot of research behind it. We talk about it pretty frequently with Hattie's research, recognizing the impact that teacher expectations have on student achievement, but then also looking at like the opportunity myth from TNTP. We know that for students who are entering the year behind grade level, that having those high expectations for them is going to help them make the largest gains throughout the year. So even though it's something we talk about really regularly, it's a great reminder how it fits into SEBL and UDL at that tier 1 core level.
And the last checkpoint in engagement is emotional capacity. And so if we're thinking about emotional capacity, we're really thinking about how are we recognizing the expectations, beliefs, and motivations in our learning environment, developing awareness of self and others. That's like a direct connection to self-awareness and that pro-social behavior skill, promoting individual and collective reflection, and cultivating empathy and restorative practices. So that first example is a nice little article. I think it comes from APA, the American Psychological Association, and that section, evidence-based strategies to create classroom culture, is a nice section to read that just thinks about how we're creating messages about success, providing opportunities, responding to struggle, and valuing placement. The second example, incorporating check-ins. This is an more elementary, but it's just a way to have yays, nays, and hip hip hoorays, really fostering that self-awareness of your learning. And the last one, teach self-regulation skills, really hones into that self-management skill. And it's a resource, it's actually a parent guide for how parents can help identify and support that self-regulation at home.
So at the end of each of these 3 sections, there's going to be a slide that looks like this with just lots of different examples about what this could look like at tier 1 core in your classroom. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to list out a couple examples of realistic practices. What could this be? So for one, when we think about the way that students are interacting with each other and just kind of providing some variety in the different learning activities that we have, I love the example of using a jigsaw activity. It's a great way to have students kind of teaching each other and becoming the experts, and then shifting the different groups that we're using. Great example of flexible grouping or cooperative learning. But so an example, maybe in a math classroom, we're learning about different transformations. We could have expert groups for translation, an expert group for reflections, an expert group for rotations, and then one for symmetry. And once they really master what that transformation is in their expert group, they then shift and then they teach each other in those new jigsaw groups. Could be a really great example of that. I also wanted to pinpoint this one around self-regulation at the bottom. Mackenzie just gave those examples of teaching some self-regulation strategies, maybe at home or doing some emotional check-ins after a difficult task. But another idea is providing those rubrics for maybe whatever the project is that we're doing, or the assignment or the activity, and then really leaning into students to do some self-reflection about their progress towards achieving that goal or whatever that skill is. So just a couple good examples of what this might look like.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. Okay, so moving into that second UDL principle, designing multiple means of representation. So really thinking about how learners differ in the ways that they are perceiving and really making that meaning of information, really honing into that network of what. So that learning, that transfer of learning really occurs when we have those multiple representations and those multiple perspectives are really used. We want to support learners to really make those connections within as well as really between those concepts. Like Mackenzie mentioned earlier with representation, there's not really one means of representation that's going to be optimal for every learner, right? So providing those options for representation is really essential. Within those guidelines, within representation, those include perception, language and symbols, and then building knowledge. And we're going to explore those just a little bit. So that first one, perception, so guideline 1, and it has those following considerations that you see there. So really supporting opportunities to customize that display of information, supporting those multiple ways to be able to perceive it, and then representing that diversity of perspectives and identities in just authentic ways. Okay, a few resources. We wanted to hone in on just a few of those. So if you take a look at the green bubble, and again, all of these are linked in, and then additional resources from even just what we're sharing today are in our Padlet as well. So that green bubble, really thinking about how it's important for us to offer that information in just a variety of different ways. And so students can really kind of explore what their learning preference is. I thought it was interesting at this summit, Katie Novak talked a little bit about learning preferences and learning styles and how we used to kind of think and talk about different learning styles and honing into those different learning styles. But we really just have learning preferences, right? And so it's important for us as educators to really engage in all of those different types of learning so that we can activate those different learning areas of the brain. So I thought that was really interesting, and that is a great resource around that. The yellow bubble there is a video, and it shows just how to use closed captioning, just kind of goes through kind of a step-by-step. If you think back to our Katie Novak video that we shared at the beginning of our time together today, we just clicked the little closed captioning button, just a great example of representation there as well. Also, something that I learned recently that in Google Slides, if you go down when you're in presentation mode, you can click the 3 little dots here. And if you go to the caption preferences, caption preferences, and then you can go to the toggle captions there. So then I'm going to allow the microphone, and then it will provide that closed captioning as you're sharing the information just at the bottom of the slide there. So not perfect captioning there, but a great resource and super easy to utilize. So we wanted to share that one with you. And then lastly on this slide, that blue bubble, that is an activity just really around perspective taking. It's called the tint of your glasses, and really is a great activity to just kind of hone in on really thinking about perspectives and how lived experiences and just being aware of different backgrounds. So another great one to access as well. Our guideline 2, so language and symbols, has those considerations that you see there. So really clarifying vocabulary, symbols, language structures, being able to support that decoding, thinking about mathematical notation and then symbols, and then really cultivating that understanding across language and dialects, and then addressing bias as we're thinking about it in the use of language and the use of symbols. And then lastly, illustrating through multiple media. So again, some resources around this consideration here. So that green bubble is a great article, comes from EdWeek, and it really talks about pre-teaching and how pre-teaching is just a great proactive, preventative strategy. It talks a little bit about the cost benefit analysis, and then really how using this strategy over remediation is really responding to those needs. And so a great article to check out there. The yellow bubble has some different activities around exploring cultural diversity. And then that blue bubble is a great one from the Iris Center. It talks about some just potential barriers within instructional design. It's a great resource. It has some like learning modules built within, so you can actually go through the module where there's different recordings, resources, links built within that actual module. But really just talks about some of the barriers that we come across when we're thinking about instructional design. Here, really thinking about how we are using different strategies to make messages just more comprehensible. So things like using visuals, using gestures, just using that repetition as we're going through information, being able to use that slower rate of speech, how we might bring in some different objects like real objects or props that we might utilize. Thinking about first language support, cognates, which are those words that in at least 2 different languages, they share that similar meaning, that spelling and pronunciation. And then, of course, modeling. So just some good reminders here as we're thinking about some of those strategies. Next up, we have guideline 3, so around building knowledge. And some of those considerations there are really working to connect that prior language to new learning. How are we doing that? How are we honing in on that? How are we making those connections? Exploring different patterns, some different big ideas, and then being able to really cultivate some multiple means of being able to know and then make meaning of that learning. And then maximizing that transfer and generalization. So how are we bringing this back in, right? How are we taking our learning and then generalizing it to a variety of different environments? The resources that we have for you guys here, that green bubble, it has an activity with lots of different ideas just around really fostering collaboration within the classroom amongst all learners. So it really connects back to our SEBL skill of building relationships, thinking about teamwork, thinking about collaboration. So it's a great article there with some different activity ideas. The yellow one is a big packet of some ideas for different anchor activities and for various content areas. So it's laid out by some different anchor activities for math, for social studies, for science, and things like that. And then that blue one also comes from the IRIS website. Again, it's one of those modules with lots of resources and videos and things like that linked in. But it really talks about some different ways to activate prior knowledge and how we might do that. And so a lot of other additional information is also embedded just around UDL in that resource as well.
So again, a couple examples of what providing multiple means of representation might look like, or designing those multiple means of representation. I love that example of using the closed captioning on the video because it really is like a zero prep type of support that we can build in, and that really ties into those accessible course materials. Other things we can think about supplementing with different videos and those real objects, the things that we can pull that students might see out in the world. And that also really ties back to that multiple means of engagement piece. You're going to see a lot of like crossover between the way some of these activities and examples of what it might look like in a classroom actually tap into different guidelines across those 3 different areas of UDL. The student created materials is another great one. Think about like the anchor charts in your room and what are the opportunities to have students help create some of those, or creating different concept maps to demonstrate their understanding and then explaining those to their peers. We know that whoever's doing the talking in the classroom is the one doing the learning. And so if students are able to teach to their peers and explain their understanding of something, we know they know it on a way deeper level. Another favorite example that I have on this one is creating a list of possibly frequently asked questions. For most of us, when we're teaching a lesson, this is not the first time that we've ever taught that lesson. We've probably taught it multiple times, or if it's a project that we're doing, we can anticipate the barriers students might be running into or the questions that come up every single year around that project or activity. If we anticipate those and create a list of frequently asked questions, and we have a spot where students can access those, we're also helping them develop that SEBL skill of problem solving. How do I find some answers and solutions to barriers that I'm running into?
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. And then that third UDL principle, so around designing those multiple means of action and expression. So really honing into that how. And then learners are obviously differ in the ways that they are able to navigate that learning environment, how they might approach different learning processes, and then expressing what they know. So we know that it's essential to really design and honor some of those different forms of action and expression. And like we mentioned earlier, there's not going to be one mean of action and expression that's going to be optimal for any one learner. So that's why we want to have those different options. This guideline within action and expression, it includes that interaction, it includes expression and communication, and then strategy development. And so just to kind of quickly explore some of those there. So interaction, we have the guideline for interaction, and it has those considerations of really varying and honoring the methods for response, for navigation, and then for movement. And then optimizing that access for accessible materials and assistive technologies and tools. So a few resources around this area, we have that green one, so offer flexible seating. This is a great resource and even just kind of thinks outside the box, like not ones that I would come up with, but has tons of different ideas for some flexible seating options. The yellow one there, offer flexible access to materials. We are calling out our NDE partners there. So we have linked in the Assistive Technology Partnership website. Again, lots of ways to just kind of filter information, search for different information, look for other resources within that website. So that's a great one there. And then that blue bubble, another great resource that really talks about being able to make adjustments to lessons, how we might really work on that engagement piece, and then really being able to maximize those teachable moments within the classroom. There's a great chart kind of towards the end of the document that has some good examples and some different samples of being able to provide different methods to demonstrate learning. Opportunities to respond. So when we're thinking about just like the consideration around responding, so opportunities to respond here. So a great teaching strategy that really elicits an academic response from students. So when we say academic response, we oftentimes use a lot of great like things like 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, right? Some of those different callbacks where they are great for bringing student attention back, might be helpful in just kind of regaining that attention or engagement, but it's not an academic response, right? So it wouldn't be considered an opportunity to respond. When we think about using these opportunities to respond, we might do so through a verbal response, we might do so through a written response, it might be a variety of different action responses, but it just gives us really great information when we're utilizing those opportunities to respond. It's a great form of like formative assessment, right? Giving us information so that we know how to best support maybe some of our academic struggles that students are having, rather than waiting until assessment time. So lots of great information. It really makes learning visible. And then research really tells us that when we think about those opportunities to respond and really using those in the classroom, we're going to see obviously more engagement, but also it's going to help decrease those disruptive behaviors and help increase that on-task behavior. Kind of something interesting here, thinking about the number of opportunities to respond. So research tells us we should have right around 3 to 5 per minute. And then for students with disabilities, right around 4 to 6 per minute. So obviously the goal is to kind of think about where you're at right now in really engaging in those opportunities to respond within the classroom and just making small steps towards giving more opportunities to respond. So just kind of a nice think about there. And when we think about how do we do that, so we said verbal responses, written responses, and then action responses. Lots of different resources kind of linked in here, but then also just some ideas around each of those different types of responses that we might bring into the classroom to really hone in on opportunities to respond. But a great reminder there is that supporting those students in being able to really use academic language, we want to be able to provide also some word banks, right? And then different sentence frames. So another great think about there. All right, so action or expression and communication is that next consideration. We're going to keep sharing information around this. I know we're a little beyond time, but great information. So if you're able to stay, we appreciate it. If you have to jump off, we will also have the recording available. So lots of great just information to share with you guys. So expression and communication is that next guideline, and really thinking about some of those considerations there. So using those multiple media for communication, different tools for construction, for composing, for creativity, and then being able to build fluencies with kind of that graduated support for practice, and then addressing bias related to those different modes of expression and communication. So the resources that we have here, the I do, we do, you do method, this is a great resource that really walks through that method. It explains each of those different steps. It gives some different ideas for how to engage in each of those steps in this high leverage practice. So a great one to check out there. The yellow bubble, we have some questions around our Nebraska MTSS problem solving model. So really thinking about some of those different questions to hone in on each of the different steps, because we obviously know that there's lots of different ways to approach a problem, lots of different solutions that we might come across. So just some like reflection questions around each step. And then the blue bubble there has some different strategies within expression and communication. And then each of the different areas are also represented in that resource. So not just around expression and communication, but we wanted to call that one out there specifically. The other one, so guideline 3, strategy development, for those considerations, really thinking about how we're setting meaningful goals. And we do have a link in there that comes from Novak Education. It's a great one around really working with students to set goals around 5 easy steps. We're also looking at anticipating and just planning for challenges that might arise, being able to bring information together and really organizing it, enhancing capacity for how we might progress monitor, and then really looking at exclusionary practices. So the resources here, our green bubble comes from Reading Rockets. So it goes through different think alouds, information around that, what those are. Some great video examples are also embedded within. The yellow bubble, using graphic organizers, has a ton of different graphic organizer examples and how to use those. There are some graphic organizers on there that I didn't even realize existed, so some great ones to access. And then the blue bubble comes from EdWeek, and it is a great story about how a teacher really targeted some self-assessment with students and helped them really kind of track their own data. So it has some tools embedded within where students can really work on charting their own data and do their own progress monitoring.
All right, a couple examples again of what it might look like to design options around multiple means of action and expression. The one thing that I would give as a reminder here is it's so important to recognize, again, I know we've said it a few times, but firm goals, flexible means, really digging back into that standard and recognizing what the demands of the standard are. So while we can provide options for the way students are going to demonstrate their learning, their understanding, that knowledge of that skill, we can give options around, are you going to write a paper? Are you going to take an assessment? Are you going to do a verbal presentation or do a podcast? We need to recognize what the standard's asking. And if the standard says you have to write something, then you need to write it. And so keeping those firm goals is really important there. An example that I would give when I taught high school ELA, whenever we would read The Telltale Heart in 9th grade by Edgar Allan Poe, students would practice like making a claim, whether or not they thought the narrator was mad when he committed that murder. But we would end up, instead of just, doing a worksheet or having students write about this claim about the narrator, we would put the narrator on trial, and students would have to cite their evidence as if we were like part of a trial. So really fun way. You can also see how that taps back into that multiple means of engagement as well. So keep in mind, kids were still citing evidence, right, and making a claim, but we were doing it in a different way than what might have been a traditional format.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. So really thinking about kind of as we close out our time, so it's not a checklist, it's just a new lens, really looking at things differently and being able to anticipate those barriers really early on and then planning for those things. So the goal isn't to embed each of these things into a lesson, right? We gave lots of different examples, went through lots of different information, but just really thinking about being proactive.
A couple different resources that are embedded in here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Magic School. It's an AI-powered tool, but they do have a choice board for UDL that's embedded on there. You would drop in the standard that you're focusing on, and just kind of what are those objectives for your activity, the grade level, and any additional detail, and it'll help you generate some choice boards. And then we also have this one on here. It's called Ludia, very similar to the way the Magic School one is set up. The only difference with this one, it doesn't just create choice boards. It'll go a little bit deeper than that, but it is not an always free tool. So when you sign up for it, you're going to get a 1-week free trial. So the only recommendation that we would give with this one is that when you sign up, be ready to try to use it for that first week so that if you really like it, you're able to go tell your administrator or supervisor kind of your rationale for maybe wanting to pay for that membership. I think it's like $30 a year. I'm not sure, something around there, but just a warning that it's not free forever.
All right. And then some other great resources for you guys. So we have Katie Novak. She was with the ESU Coordinating Council doing a little podcast. This was prior to the Nebraska NeMTSS Summit, but a great one, some great information in there. And then, of course, the Novak Education site, we have LinkedIn as well. She has lots of great resources around UDL all throughout her site, including a couple choice boards here as well. So a couple things to check out. She talked a little bit about it at the summit as well, but there are some different examples of some choice boards, has a guide for teachers, and then also kind of an example choice board for students as well. So something that they can use, something that can be handed out to them, printed off, laminated, whatever that might be. So a great free resource there. And then a few others just to kind of wrap up there. We have LinkedIn. All of these are also in our Padlet. There's a podcast, UDL in 15 minutes, that we've linked, early childhood crosswalk there, and then just kind of an outline of some UDL information and some different examples for each of the different areas. I know ESU 3 also has a ton of resources that they have put together around UDL that they have available on their site as well. All right, Mackenzie had put in the exit ticket in the chat, so we would love for you guys to fill out that information if you have questions or if you have thoughts, ideas for future Coffee Connects. We are working on putting together our dates for next semester, so we would love to hear just thoughts of information that you guys are looking for as well. If you need a certificate of attendance, you can also let us know and we can share that with you. Our next Coffee Connect is on November 20th at 8 o'clock. It is going to be around literacy and SEBL. A few other just upcoming trainings here. So we have our fall events. All of the information on those are linked in. Our future Coffee Connect dates for November and December. Our Nebraska NeMTSS program comparison tool and user guide here. And then that brings us to our optimistic closure. So really thinking about that implementing UDL, it requires us to really unlearn many beliefs, many assumptions, and teaching practices that no longer work. So we would love to hear, you guys can put it in the chat. You can certainly unmute as well, but maybe what's one belief or assumption that you may need to unlearn to make Tier 1 core more accessible? So really just kind of using that as a reflection. And we appreciate you guys joining us. Hopefully you were able to take away some different resources around UDL. This recording will be available on our Nebraska NeMTSS Media Library, probably within the next couple weeks. Lastly, here's our contact information if you have any questions. Thanks for joining us today.